My father never had sonar. He never had a fishing GPS, never had a boat with $500 electronics hanging from the bow. What he had was a piece of line, an old sinker, and knowledge that I almost let die. And look what happened when I used that knowledge one Saturday afternoon. I caught 23 bass, while the guy on the boat next to me, with a new sonar, a $300 reel, and imported silicone lures, catched three fish. I caught 23. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications. What I'm going to show you today is something the industry doesn't want you to know. Let me tell you how this afternoon began. I arrived at the lake with a plastic bucket, a simple rod, and some setup I'd learned by observing my father's old notes, a yellowed notebook from 1971 that he kept in a biscuit tin. The guy in the boat next to me looked at me with that look. You know that look? This guy doesn't know what he's doing. Look, he had a latest model Humminbird mounted on the side, color screen, integrated GPS, real-time depth mapping. I had a sinker and an 8-pound line. 2 hours later, he stopped the engine and came over to me rowing. "What bait are you using?" I showed him. He was silent for about 5 seconds. "This is corn?" "Yes, corn. Fermented. Prepared in a specific way, with a temperature trick that fishermen in the 70s used before any industrialized product existed. And it worked better than anything he had on that boat. This wasn't a lucky day. This happens every time I use this technique. It's not a coincidence. It's not chance. It's science. But the kind of science nobody teaches you because they don't have a product to sell along with it. Now let me explain where this trick comes from. In the 1970s, in the United States, sport fishing hadn't yet become the billion-dollar industry it is today. There weren't Bass Pro shops on every corner. There was no consumer sonar, no GPS in your pocket, no silicone lures with synthetic shrimp scent. What existed was knowledge passed down orally, from father to son, from old river fishermen to young people who had the patience to listen. The fishermen of that generation developed techniques based on pure observation. Years and years fishing in the same lake, the same river, the same reservoir, noting what worked. There were no apps for that. They had notebooks and memory. And those guys fished a lot indeed. One of the most commonly used tricks back then was the controlled fermentation of natural baits. It wasn't mysticism, it wasn't old people's superstition. It was chemistry applied in practice without knowing the scientific name. They knew that certain foods, when fermented for the right time and temperature, attracted fish in a way that no artificial bait could imitate. The smell penetrated the water column differently. It stayed in the water longer. It created an olfactory trail that the fish followed for meters, sometimes tens of meters. This was passed down as a secret. Literally, a secret. I've spoken with fishermen from Mississippi, Tennessee, Texas, old men in their 70s and 80s, who told me that their fathers guarded the recipe like it was gold. They didn't teach it to the neighbors. They didn't tell the fishing club. It was a family secret. And do you know what happened to that knowledge when the fishing industry exploded in the 80s and 90s? It disappeared. It was swallowed up. Stores started selling ready-made baits, artificial attractants, products with a scientific formula printed on the packaging. The young fisherman stopped asking his grandfather and started asking the store clerk. And the store clerk is interested in selling you the most expensive product on the shelf. The grandfather isn't. Now I need to stop here for a second. This fermentation trick is just a fraction of what the industry has hidden. I've compiled everything I've found: techniques for reading water, strategic positioning, fish behavior patterns, current and structure control. In my book, High-Level Fishing, The Water Game. Inside you'll find reading freshwater and saltwater in practice, How to identify productive zones in less than 2 minutes. Structure. Where the fish really are. Stop wasting time in dead spots. Current, tide, and water flow. The invisible engine that controls everything. Positioning and angle of attack. What matters more than the lure? Fish behavior patterns. How to predict where they will be before you arrive. Real-time decision-making. Stop trying. Start deciding. The mindset of a high-level fisherman. What separates amateur from true professional. No beating around the bush. No magic formula. Applied knowledge, straight to the point. The link is in the description. But now, let me show you what this trick is and why it destroys any $500 sonar. The main ingredient is corn. Common yellow corn, the kind you buy in bulk for less than $1. But it's not just any corn. It's fermented corn with a specific step that fishermen in the 70s called curing. And the curing is what changes everything. When corn undergoes controlled fermentation, it releases organic acids, esters, and sulfur compounds in small but detectable quantities. These compounds are the same ones that decomposing algae, dead crustaceans, and natural organic matter release at the bottom of lakes and rivers. For a fish, this smell means one thing: food available, easy, abundant. The olfactory system of a carp, a bass, or a catfish is between 10,000 and 100,000 times more sensitive than ours. A single molecule of this compound diluted in billions of water molecules is enough to activate the fish's olfactory receptor and trigger searching behavior. It doesn't think, it just goes. It's instinct, and instinct can't be turned off. No sonar can tell you where the fish will be in 10 minutes. But when you create a scent trail at the right spot, you decide where the fish will be. You stop looking for fish and start calling fish. That's the turning point. The industry sells synthetic artificial attractants for $12, $15, $20 a bottle. Complex formulas, flashy packaging, names in Latin, and some of these products work reasonably well. I'm not going to lie. But none of them work better than the naturally fermented version because fermentation produces a much wider spectrum of compounds than any synthetic formula can replicate. It's like comparing artificial orange juice to a freshly squeezed orange. The artificial tries to imitate. The natural is. Now, the step-by-step instructions. You will need 2 cups of dried yellow corn, whole, not ground, enough filtered water to cover 1 tablespoon of white sugar, 1 teaspoon of coarse salt, a glass jar with a lid. Do not use plastic. Plastic interferes with the process. First step, place the corn in the glass jar and cover with filtered water. The water temperature matters. Use room temperature water between 68 degree points and 75 degree points. Water that is too cold stops fermentation. Water that is too hot kills the bacteria that make the process happen. Dissolve the sugar and salt in the water before adding it. The sugar serves as initial fuel for fermentation. The salt regulates the type of bacteria that will dominate the process. You want lactic fermentation, not putrefaction. This difference is the secret that the old fishermen knew without knowing the scientific name. Close the jar, but not completely. Leave a small gap for the carbon dioxide to escape. If you seal it tightly, the jar may pressurize. Cover it with a clean cloth secured with a rubber band if it doesn't have a valve lid. Leave in a dark, dry place for 72 hours. Do not touch. Do not check every hour. Let it work. After 72 hours, you'll notice a sour, slightly fruity smell, similar to craft beer at the beginning of fermentation. That's the right smell. If it smells rotten or too strongly sulfuric, discard it and start again with fresher water. The corn will be slightly swollen, with a softer husk, and some kernels may have cracks. That's perfect. Drain the fermentation water, but keep it in a separate container. This water will be your liquid lure at the fishing spot. In the refrigerator, fermented corn lasts up to 10 days. In the freezer, it lasts 3 months without losing its effectiveness. Freeze it in separate portions so you don't have to defrost it all at once. Total cost, less than $1.50. Active preparation time, about 15 minutes. Waiting time, 72 hours. Now, if you want to boost it even further, you can add elements that cover all 3 of the fish's main sensory systems at the same time. For the sense of smell, you already have the fermented compounds, but to enhance it, mix a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, not artificial, into the fermentation water before using. Vanilla contains vanillin, which amplifies the olfactory perception of various freshwater fish species, especially carp and tilapia. It sounds strange. It really works. For the palate, yes, fish have a highly developed sense of taste, with receptors distributed throughout the mouth, lips, and even the body surface. Add a pinch of monosodium glutamate to the fermentation water. MSG activates umami receptors that signal available protein. The fish bites with more confidence because the taste confirms what the smell promised. For visual purposes, use whole corn kernels, not cut ones. The size and shape of the kernel mimic the eggs of small aquatic invertebrates that many species naturally consume. In water with reasonable visibility, this visual presentation completes the attraction cycle. So why does the new generation hate this trick? Because it's slow, because it's laborious, because it doesn't have pretty packaging, it doesn't have a QR code, it doesn't have an influencer endorsement. The new generation of fishermen was raised in a culture of instant solutions. They go into the store, buy the product, use it the same day. I understand. But the problem is that this culture of immediate consumption has created fishermen who depend on the store for everything. This takes the store out of the equation, and they get lost. The fisherman of the 70s didn't have that option. He needed to produce. And by producing, he learned. And by learning, he caught more fish than any electronic gadget allows today. A $500 sonar shows you where the fish are right now, but it doesn't tell you how to attract fish to where you want them. It tells you nothing about behavior, feeding patterns, or how fish respond to different temperature and atmospheric pressure conditions. It gives you a picture. You need a film. And this fermentation trick is part of a much larger knowledge system. A system that covers current reading, identification of underwater structure without electronics, boat or shore positioning to maximize bait presentation, and understanding feeding patterns by time and season. All of this together is what makes a consistent fisherman. Not a gadget. Not an expensive lure. Consistency comes from accumulated knowledge, applied with intention. When using fermented corn, he starts with the baiting method. Before putting the rod in the water, he throws a small handful, about 15 to 20 pieces, into the spot where he's going to fish. He waits 8 to 10 minutes. This time is for the olfactory trail to spread through the water column and for the first fish to start approaching. Then you present the hook with 2 or 3 grains of bait. No more than that. Too much bait on the hook reduces the hook set rate because the fish can pull without taking the hook. The best times are early morning, between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., and late afternoon, between 4:30 p.m. and sunset. During these periods, the water temperature tends to be more stable, and the fish are more active in the intermediate layers, where the olfactory trail is concentrated. On days with low atmospheric pressure, before a cold front, for example, the fish tend to move closer to the surface. This reduces the weight of the sinker and allows them to work at a shallower depth. On hot summer days, the opposite occurs. The fish migrate to cooler layers, so they work deeper. For bass, Use corn as a secondary bait combined with a light jig. The corn attracts, the jig's movement closes the sail. For carp and tilapia, corn alone is sufficient. These species are natural foragers and respond very directly to scent. For catfish, mix fermented corn with a small piece of sardine. The combined olfactory profile is powerful in a way that no store-bought stink bait can imitate. Avoid fishing immediately after heavy rain. Murky water reduces the effectiveness of visual stimuli and dilutes the olfactory trail more quickly. Wait for the water to settle, usually 4 to 6 hours after the rain, to use this technique for maximum results. And the most common mistake I see is putting too much bait in the water at the beginning. It seems counterintuitive, but excessive chumming scares away cautious fish, especially bass and trout. Less is more. Light, consistent chumming at 10 to 15-minute intervals. This creates an active trail without saturating the spot. And remember, this fermentation trick is just the beginning. If you want the complete system that the industry buried, it's all in high-level fishing, the water game. There you will learn water reading. Identify productive zones in seconds without electronics. Structure and positioning. Where the fish actually are, not where the sonar thinks they are. Current and tide control. Use the force of the water to your advantage. Behavioral patterns. Predict the fish's movements before they happen. High-level mindset. Stop trying and start deciding with intention. The link is in the first pinned comment. It's the knowledge they tried to bury, now in your hands. Think about your next fishing trip. While the guy next to you spends $500 on sonar and $20 on synthetic bait, you spend $150 and 72 hours waiting. You arrive at the right spot, at the right time, with a scent trail that the fish can't ignore. In 2 hours, you've already surpassed the number of fish he'll catch in the entire day. Your friends ask what you used. You smile. You decide whether to tell them. The industry has built a billion-dollar business by convincing you that good fishing is expensive. Sonar, GPS, $15 lures, $400 reels. But anglers in the 1970s didn't have any of that and filled their freezers every week. What they did have was time, observation, and knowledge. And that knowledge costs less than $2. What will change on your next fishing trip now that you know this? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next video features an even older and even more forgotten trick.